Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds, and I'm here with Keith, co-star of my upcoming film, If, only in theaters May 17th. Do you want to tell people the big news? All right, I'll do it. Sign up now and you'll get unlimited for $15 a month and 6 months of Paramount Plus Essential Plan on us. MintMobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 equivalent to $15 per month. Unlimited over 40 gigabytes per month. Face lower speeds. Videos at 480p. Active Mint customers by 531.24 get 6 months of Paramount Plus Essential Plan. Auto renews after 6 months. Offer ends May 31st, 2024. Separate Paramount Plus registration required. Terms and conditions apply if rated PG.
Hello and welcome to Outward, Slate's LGBT show. I am Brian Louder, an editor at Slate, and this week we have a long-promised, much-anticipated advice show for you. Thanks to all of the listeners who've sent in letters, and please send in more. We really like doing this. It's been fun to prepare for this one, so just a call right up here at the top to send more of your problems, low stakes, high drama, whatever it is, into us by voice memo if you can, but email's fine too, at outwardpodcast@slate.com for future shows, because it's going to be fun to get into these letters today. All right, now it is time to meet our distinguished panel of advice givers. I see on my screen here Jules Gold-Peterson. Hello.
Hello, famous know-it-all with too many opinions about how to live your life, which normally I have to keep to myself, which is, I think, a tragedy for the whole world. So I'm grateful/alarmed that I'm back.
I think you're very wise. Yeah. Someone new to the show that we're so excited to have joining, Mathew Rodriguez. If you have been reading queer journalism for many years now, you'll probably know Mathew's byline. He's an award-winning writer living in Brooklyn. He's a former senior editor at The Atlantic, Them and the Body, which is a great HIV/AIDS news website. His work has been featured in The Nation, The Village Voice, HuffPost, BuzzFeed, The Daily Beast, Out, Mike, Into, everywhere. His work has also been featured in the anthologies A Great Gay Book and Modern Loss, and he is currently working on a memoir, which I'm very excited about, called Tough Guy, which is forthcoming from Abrams. Mathew, welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. The last time I was on a kind of audio podcast thing, I got an angry email saying that my voice goes up at the end when I speak, and the person was very angry. So I hope I've worked on it.
Wow.
Oh,
also, what? I have so many problems with that person's criticism.
I do too. I posted about it on Twitter and people were, defending me and as they should be. But, I'm hoping that I'm not going to get an angry email for the way I speak.
I mean, use your voice, honey, any way you want it. As someone who grew up on the West Coast in the 1990s, I will not have my culture attacked. And I think you're welcome to upspeak however you want.
Yeah, all inflections are welcome on the Outward podcast. And if we get that email, we will just throw it right in the trash. That's ridiculous. But yeah, it's so exciting to have you on the show to answer some advice questions. I think this is a good little set. So let's have a quick break. And then when we come back, we will dive right into our first question.
The Coca-Cola Company, Keurig Dr. Pepper, and PepsiCo are bringing consumers more choices with less sugar than ever before. From sparkling, flavored, and bottled waters to zero-sugar sports drinks, teas, and sodas, consumers are taking advantage of these choices. In fact, nearly 60% of beverages sold contain zero sugar. To learn more, visit balanceus.org.
All right, we are back. Our first question. I was in a conference last year and met a person who told me their pronouns were they, them, and that they worked with transgender youth. Later, when chatting in the hot tub, I asked them if they used they, them pronouns because they identified as non-binary or if they were wanting to show solidarity with people of different genders. I had come across cisgender people who proposed that we all use they, them pronouns. This particular person then went on to rant about how it really bugs them that people who aren't transgender or non-binary use they, them pronouns. Wondering if you all have any thoughts about this topic. I was a little taken aback. What thoughts do we have for hot tub thoughts?
I'm like, hot tub thoughts? Did you just work on something to attempt to get me to go on a rant on this show? Because this would be like cooked up in a lab. I have a lot of thoughts. But like, I mean, you know, we are living in the era of they, them, a very historically novel era. Who knows where it will go in the future? But it certainly does get contentious. I mean, first of all, I'm like, wow, y'all are having some really real conversations in a hot tub. That is like,
Right.
First of all, I just want to applaud. Part of what's interesting to me here is like the ostensible disagreement is over using they, them pronouns as if who should and shouldn't use them, properly speaking, has to do with identity or has to do with the speaker. Like only the correct kind of speaker can use them. And, you know, it's like that's a very 21st century, very gender identity way to think about our relationship to language. And so, you know, my perspective on that's like famously a little different. I don't think that's how language operates. I don't think we have in ourselves that actually work that way, which I think is the good news. But it also seems like, so like the rant from this other hot tub person seems to be that there are correct kinds of people to use pronouns and there are incorrect kind of people to use pronouns. That, you know, yeah, that doesn't seem like a particularly wonderful way to think about language. But, you know, I think like my general like point of view on pronouns and language talk is that it's like a pretty bougie dilemma in the first place. And it's like, honestly, like I mean this sincerely as a scholar, not just as a transsexual woman. You know, it's like it's a very college educated, very like kind of waspy dilemma in the first place. Not meaning that only people who are wasps talk like this, but it's just like these are the kinds of preoccupations we have when we're not wanting to pay attention to other, say, trans political issues that might be super important. So like I gather Hot Tub Thoughts is kind of like sorting through that as well, feeling like, wow, this person got really upset over this. They were a little taken aback by it. And yeah, I think I agree. It's like showing solidarity by using they, them pronouns. Oh, no. That is not what political solidarity is. And no one's asking you to do that. Also, it's not helpful. And if anything, it might be the exact opposite. It might conceal like real political differences. And, you know, I'll just say as a woman who wrote a book about it, I'm very against like universal they, them, anything. I think that that's often, consciously or not, it's almost always part of a gambit to get rid of trans women from like whatever the worldview is. It's almost always a rejection of poor Black and brown girls. Like the ones who has too much gender is always poor women. It's always sex workers. It's always trans women. So it's like totally with you, Hot Tub Thoughts. I think like, you know, it's just like a very sign of the times that like that's the kind of conversation that would come up in the first place. But feels like in a hot tub, maybe all you got to do is like pour another drink and change the subject. But out there in the world, yeah, maybe there are other channels for us to turn on to. I don't know. What do you two think?
Well, when I was reading this question or when I had heard the question, I was thinking about, I guess, the impetus for the person to share with the stranger in a hot tub, you know, their feeling about universal they, them pronouns. And that for me was an exercise in empathy, like trying to just understand where this was coming from. And the closest I could get was thinking about how with language, especially with language from like minority groups and from queer people, like sometimes there's this feeling of slippage where, you know, it's supposed to mean this one specific thing and then it gets diluted as it goes on. And I was even thinking about like my own relationship to the word queer and how, you know, a long time ago, queer felt very political and its use was to denote, you know, a political lean of some sort. And now it's like, this Chipotle is queer. And it's a very different...
Yes, they are.
Yeah, they are queer. All the theys in this Chipotle are queer.
Nightmare porno.
And so I was actually having a talk with a couple of queer and trans friends about this recently. And we were just saying that in a lot of ways, it's now wrapped around to where gay feels more political than queer and even more charged than queer. And so this was kind of, to me, how I could relate to it and think about how these terms that even like a pronoun like they, them, denotes an identity that is outside the binary, yes, but then now sometimes they get used in ways that don't feel as radical. They instead get used to actually, as you were talking about, Jules, like delegitimize or further push certain identities out of the sphere of conversation. So that's where, you know, I don't know the other person sitting opposite Hot Tub Thoughts, but that's where I kind of came from. I saw at least concern for this kind of slippage, but at the same time, that person's concern does not also have to be Hot Tub Thoughts' concern.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that you brought up the queer comparison because I had the same sort of thought. I was like, I remember, God, how many years ago now? There was like this moment around, I think it was a New York Times op-ed about like, if everybody's queer, then like, is anybody queer? Like, what does it mean? There was this like whole discussion about the dilution, as you said, Matt, about that word. And I feel like I like, having thought through that, like came down on sort of the side of like, you're not queer unless there's like stakes to it, right? Like if it's just kind of like a identification that's about being progressive or something like that, which is a thing I've encountered in the world, that doesn't sit right with me. Rather, it's about like something in your life, whether it's your sexuality or your gender identity or whatever, is putting you in crosshairs of some sort of maybe hatred or just counter to what's normal, right? Quote unquote normal. And that's that. There has to be a kind of boundary there, or it is meaningless. I don't know if if it works quite the same way with this. I was also curious if the letter writer and their conversation partner, hot tub partner, were thinking about this other idea of like, do we assume people are they, them? And so, do you have like a default assumption in the world that everyone's a they, them until like they tell you their pronouns otherwise? I feel like that was a debate that the community, I don't think, has settled totally. I've read very different opinions about it. So that felt like a piece of this too. But I get the impulse to want to like draw lines around these things because they do kind of lose their impact if you don't. I don't know.
Well, so like for instance, to put myself on the line, like I use he they pronouns, and also I also understand that that gets an eye roll from a lot of people in general. I feel like he theys get a lot of eye rolls, but I feel like for instance I do it because I understand that I probably to the average person look like a he, but I also understand that I'm trying to at least draw attention in using it to the fact that gender is both real and fake at the same time, and that I am comfortable with either because I find that my gender is made up of probably traditionally masculine things and traditionally feminine things, and I inhabit both and try to move between both. But to the average person walking down the street, if they had to assign me a gender, I don't know why we're asking them to do that. But if they did, this, and even right now when I'm speaking and I'm speaking of this imaginary person assigning me a gender, I'm using the singular they to talk about it, you know? So
yeah,
with this question, because we only have this person's lens, we only have Hot Tub Thoughts' lens on the original kind of complaint, you know?
Yeah.
We don't know exactly what the nature of it is. We don't know if it's, you know, the dilution of they, them, or, you know, where it's coming from. But there's so many different ways to engage in using they, them, whether it's grammatical or whether it's really tied to gender.
Yeah, I think it's a lovely illustration of how the dominant middle class rubric we have just, you know, obviously is really aspirational and idealistic and just like absolutely doesn't really work in practice. I don't mean anyone's particular investments in it. I mean, like the rules of the system are completely contradictory. Like gender is supposed to be your individual property, your deep personal private self thing. But in reality, it's so intensely social, and language is the actual thing. Like pronouns are one main way right now that people try to like mediate that. So like you can actually have it both ways, right? Gender can't be totally private and then made transparent through language if it's 100% social also and impersonal, right? And so we're just sort of endlessly caught up in this like, well, what about this? What about that? What about, right? Like it's sort of endlessly fascinating, and I think works really well like on the internet, for instance, because you can keep running the numbers over and over again and get a different answer each time, which is sort of like, yeah, that'll hold your attention, right? And that can feel really intense and can feel really high stakes. And I think that turns out the hot tub is kind of the amazing for this to kind of show up, right? It's like a chill setting that became kind of high stakes. And I think that's sort of an interesting reminder that language and pronouns seem to have a lot of value and stakes attached to them right now. But in reality, it's hard to compel them to do any of the things that they're apparently supposed to be able to do for us. And that to me always feels like a helpful reminder. And, you know, I'll just say as a historian, I'm writing about the history of things that led to, among other things, the they, them era and non-binary. And part of what's really interesting is like, it's not the newest idea. Like in the 70s, it was all about androgyny and the exact argument that gay people and feminists, and actually, interestingly, a lot of trans men and a lot of very upper rich, highly educated transvestite women made was that androgyny, by which they meant the fact that you could be both, like have attributes associated with men and women and dress however you wanted, that was actually like better and more noble than the people who wanted to be men and women and acted like it, that it was enlightened, that it was totally like a pretentious class thing, but it was also offered as like a left-wing politics, really combine them in a way that I think is interesting. And it's just fascinating to me that, like, in some ways we're doing that over again, but with the internet, which is totally wild. And with very different clothes, because like androgyny back then could mean like a gay man who had shoulder length hair. But also could mean like a gay man who was sensitive. And it could also mean like a trans woman who is like, I kept my corporate job, which is male coded, right? And it's just like, just goes to show like this system is so silly because the components of it are like this like language model flattens everything where it's like, well, being a corporate analyst is like, not incidental in your life, right? It's not quite the same as having a haircut, but like this like system lets you like make all these interesting choices and again, I think compute it in different ways. And it's just sort of fascinating to me that, kind of 50 years on, we're doing it even more than ever. It just feels, I don't know, really interesting to me.
Yeah. All right. Well, hot tub thoughts. I don't think we have like an easy answer for you there. I'm sorry you were taking.
But glad you're in a hot tub.
But glad you're in a hot tub. Glad you're at a fun conference. And, I think there were a lot of different threads to think about in those answers about what those pronouns mean to different people. And, I think to answer at least one of the questions in here, we don't all need to use them all the time. But I think we can land on that as a definite no. Otherwise, it's in flux and very interesting. So hopefully that was helpful.
We'll be right back in a moment with some more advice questions after this short break. Shall we look at another question?
Yeah.
All
yes,
right,
please.
I will read this one. This question comes from Old Dad in a Modern World, phrase I've been waiting to say. I am the Gen X child, 46 and male, of Midwestern parents. I was born and raised in a politically liberal part of Texas. That said, manners matter even in my area of Texas. I was raised to always say things like yes, please, and no, thank you, and use terms like sir and ma'am. Fast forward. I have 2 kids, a neurodivergent son who's about to turn 10 and a daughter who is 8. I'm proud to say that they both are regularly complimented by other parents, teachers, camp counselors, etc. with regard to their manners. They've been taught the same things. I and my wife, who's a 6th-generation Texan, was also taught. That said, I'm concerned about offending a non-binary individual when my son or daughter might use a title like Mr. or Ms. or Sir or Ma'am. I personally still use Sir or Ma'am all the time, even when talking to my own kids, but I also don't want to offend someone by using only cisgender terms. I hadn't thought of this before, and nobody has ever seemed offended by my manners or those of my kids, but I don't want to teach my kids something that might offend in today's modern world. It is very important to me that they continue to have good manners and are respectful and polite, as I think that is something the world could use more of. But I want to do it in a way that is respectful of new norms and gender definition. My son's being autistic makes this even more concerning to me, as he will be very upset and confused if he offends someone when trying to, quote, do the right thing, end quote, in his mind and be polite. Can you help me here? And that's from Old Dad in Modern World. So what do you think?
I love Old Dad's concern.
It's so thoughtful. And
Old Dad energy.
sweet.
I love Old Dad.
I appreciated that part of it.
I was also raised to be very polite, so I felt a lot of felt very connected to this concern. Yeah. But I think ultimately what I was thinking about when I read this question was that this is a concern about what I would call like a cultural script, like, or just a custom. And when you walk into the room, you say, hello, sir, hello, ma'am, thank you, sir. Like, these are these scripts that we are taught. But the issue to me is that scripts always are in need of updating. Those custom scripts go through a natural updating process. And really, to me, the core of the issue here is that I'm seeing that really Old Dad is just saying, like, this script that I have, I don't really know how to rewrite it, or can you help me rewrite it for a 2024 sensibility? I think also in addressing that, we have to look back and be like, well, what is this script for? Because it's not only just manners. Like when we talk about being polite, and the reason my mother raised me, it's because we want people to know that we come from a good family. It's all about like, reflecting on the family and saying your mother raised you this way. And, oh, I know that this Rodriguez kid, that his mom is nice and stuff like that. So it does go back to that family concern.
Right.
But at the same time, if you still want as many parents do, want their child to have manners and talk that way, why not amend the script to say, you should still say please and thank you either without a gendered moniker, or if you feel so compelled that you have to use a gendered moniker, can you maybe ask the person what they prefer before doing it? Like, hi, my name is Billy. How would you like to be addressed? Or something like that. You can either add to the script or take out the gendered moniker, but it's just about adjusting this like script that we're handed and not feeling like we have to uncritically hand it to the next generation,
Yeah. No, I mean, as a Southerner who was raised in this exact way too, like I still actually, I do this when I go back home with like elders, like with my grandmother, I say, yes, ma'am, for sure. So I get the concern, but I think you're so right, Matthew, like that it's what I'm sensing here is like this letter writer is trying to grapple with a change that he's seen that he thinks, he wants his kids to be sensitive to in the world. And the conflict is between, this like old script that actually doesn't work. And so I think just to build on what you were saying, really, what I think the parent wants to probably do is emphasize to the kids that walking around the world worried about people's gender or pronouns or whatever it is, and like in a kind of anxious way is maybe not what we want to be doing anymore. That maybe that's not the first thing about a person that we should be scanning for, sort of, because that's what that script implies, is that you're walking around and immediately like figuring out who someone is, right? And I don't think it's like super radical to just sort of de-emphasize that in your teaching of etiquette and manners. And I think that wouldn't be so hard. And and I agree totally, just like focusing on the good stuff, which is thank you and please. And all of that is like fine and well and like nice in the world. So you can certainly still teach all of that without having to necessarily address someone's gender in one way or the other. What do you think, Jules?
Yeah, I don't know if I have advice on this one, in part because, okay, everyone knows I'm Canadian. I actually didn't believe that Americans said like sir and ma'am. I thought that was like a thing I had seen in movies that was stylized. I'm just not sure. I think manners are perfectible. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. It seems tough when you're raising kids. Like, I will admit, I don't have that pressure. No one has to depend on my manners but me.
I'm looking back at the beginning of the question, and old dad says, I was raised to always say things like yes, please, and no, thank you, and use terms like sir and ma'am. And I think that two things. Sometimes ways that we were raised do need examining before we pass them on. And so we don't have to pass things on uncritically. We can, there are plenty of things that I was taught as a customer ritual in my family that I don't want to pass on, and that's just the reality of it. And I'm not saying that they're like awful things, but it's just not how I would, if I were raising a child, raise my child. And I'm sure that's almost universal for a lot of people, that they feel like, I think when it comes to parenting, it's kind of a chew the meat, spit out the fat thing. Like, you don't have to and just uncritically inherit everything that your parents did.
That's what old dad is doing.
Yeah.
He's actually being very thoughtful and going through that process, which I appreciate. I think that seems to me like one of the possible bright spots of raising kids, is getting to really critically examine how you were raised and what you would pass on, with whatever agency you ultimately have in shaping your kids, which, who knows? Not to stress you out, old dad. I'm sure you've thought about it.
I think you can think about these things in different ways. I don't think any of us would advise passing these things down uncritically at all, for sure. Maybe abandoning them as the right thing. But I do think there's like room in there for thinking of them as almost like a special language that you pull out from time to time when it makes people happy or feel better and it doesn't cost you anything, So that's something to think about, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that parenting is like all about giving your child tools and options and ways to operate. Yeah. And so saying you must do this in every setting is actually a restriction. And what old dad is illustrating is that restriction or that obligation actually doesn't work in all situations. And so we can give our children like more agile tools to respond to situations than, well, the answer is just sir or ma'am, or even just be, using that gendered moniker or all those things. So we can present our children with options and ways to navigate the world instead of mandates.
I love that. I think that's a
I like
great
that
place to
too.
leave that question. Matthew, do you want to read the last question?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Hi, y'all. I am a 26-year-old recently out trans femme. My brother is engaged and getting married this coming June, on Pride weekend no less. Homophobic, but I'm breathing through it. He's been very accommodating about my newly realized identity, labeling me his quote-unquote best person, a bit white bread, but whatever, and didn't bat an eye when I asked to wear a dress when standing up with his groomsmen. But here's the rub. He and his fiancée have a color theme based on gender. The girls on her side are all wearing pink dresses, the boys on his side all wearing green suits. They are in complete deadlock over what to do with me. My brother wants me in a green dress on his side. His fiancée wants me in a pink dress on her side. This has been going on for months to no avail. So I'm considering offering to just suck it up and wear a green suit for the night to make things easy. And to be honest, I'm already pretty nervous because I haven't met any of her family, but I know they're pretty old school. I haven't even seen any of my extended family since coming out. Maybe it would just be easier to say, forget it, since it's one day and it isn't about me. But at the same time, should I really let the straights win on Pride weekend? I know there will be endless photos memorializing the day, and I don't really want me in a suit remembered forever, but I also don't want to put myself in a bad situation or put undue stress on my brother and his fiancée. I really can't decide. What should I do? Sorry for the rambling email. Lots of love. Dressed to de-stress.
Aw, I love Dress to De-Stress.
I love Dress to De-Stress.
First of all, Dress to De-Stress, congratulations on being so popular that people are literally fighting over what you're going to wear to the wedding. You are already upstaging everyone, and I support that.
Yeah, I think you've made it about now.
I need this docuseries about Dress to De-Stress.
I know, right? The rise of athleisure. No, I mean, I really appreciate this because I don't want to like take someone's advice question as a chance to pontificate. Just kidding. What have I been doing this whole episode? But I really appreciate what you're saying, Dress to De-Stress, because you're getting at something that I think is a little bit taboo in our era of transgender inclusion. And I actually think it's great that we're talking about, one, a wedding. So like not real life. Two, it's on Pride weekend. Very interesting. And three, that you actually like are seeing it through that lens of basically like the stakes of being out. And, you know, look, for trans femininity, like the time period when you're coming out is going to be volatile. It can often be, for some people, the most difficult, chaotic, destabilizing, and even dangerous time in their life. So like, I am a huge fan of like making practical choices instead of idealistic choices. And I just wanted to say that I think I'm reading in between the lines, but it seems to me that part of what you're rubbing up against is this presumption, this like actually very much originally a gay liberation presumption that being out is good, that being out sets you free, that I think has always, to my mind, transposed very poorly to some groups of trans people, mostly kids and women. I'm like, oh, you know, being out and being yourself, yeah, it could be the most dangerous thing you're choosing to do every day. Or like, not that you always get to choose, but like, it's not a good in and of itself. And one thing I really begrudge about the kind of shallowness of the trans inclusion era we live in is how much work is demanded from the person who is doing the coming out and the transition to repair everything around them, right?
Which is so clear here. Yeah,
right? And so like when you say Dress to De-Stress, like should I just forget about it so that like it's not a huge like stressor on me? Like fuck yeah, honey. Like if this is going to be cost benefit, right? Like I don't know what weddings mean to you or what wedding photos mean to you, but like if seeing the picture, if you're going to have to see the picture and for years to come in the suit is like worse than having to go through that shit that day, right? Like, I don't know, you know, I can't tell you what will and won't be bad, but I just want to say, like, I'm a big fan of saying this because no one is saying this anymore. Like, it's cool to be closeted. It's cool to lead a double life. It's cool to not tell people. It's cool to cross-dress. It's cool to do it. Like, just do whatever the fuck you need to do to, like, make yourself feel okay in high-stress situations that are not your fault. And also, right, like, part of trans misogyny is that it's like it takes shape for impersonal reasons, right? Like people having weddings is not technically about you, but people will will take your passive presence, right, as an invitation to harass you or whatever, just because like that's how trans misogyny works. And if like making a decision that like is a tough pill to swallow, nevertheless makes that day go by easier, needing to do less like repair work afterwards for yourself, right? Basically, if like it means you don't have to have as many cocktails at the reception, or you don't need as many therapy sessions after, or also, I don't want this to like stress you about wearing dresses in the future. Like whatever you got to do for that day, I think that's a great choice to make. So I just wanted to make sure I said that, because I also think that's something that I wish was being said and broadcast more widely in the world right now, especially to trans girls and especially to trans kids. That is not your job to be out, and it's not your job to be proud, and it is not your job to make sure every social situation you're in works smoothly or to like fix problems in your family. You can literally not tell people and lie to them if that makes you feel better. And I support you. Yeah.
Yeah. No, actually, Jules, I think I'm on your side. When I was reading this, I was thinking about there's a lot of like sort of landmines like in this description of what's happening. We've got fiance's family who's pretty old school, right? Like, what does that mean exactly? We don't know. Is that like, are they going to be super transphobic or you know, like what is that bringing to the thing? But also just, it's worth remembering that weddings bring out the weirdest and often I would say conservative, traditional, in the traditional sense, feelings and sort of hidden ideas and like beliefs in people that, and I'm saying this from experience, like it's sort of, you're shocked by some of the stuff that like filters up in the presence of this ritual that is so based on, or, you know, infused with gender, with like traditional ideas of gender. It's like probably the most, I don't know, besides like a gender reveal party, like the most like literal thing where, you know, in terms of a traditional, you know, opposite sex wedding, everything's about sort of the re-articulation of gender roles and that kind of thing. So I would be very nervous about this if I were the letter writer, because you don't even know what strange things you're going to be walking into in a situation like that, which would lead me to want to probably think heavily about, you know, staying, you know, in the closet or whatever phrase you would use for this, because it may just be too, not even just stressful, but like kind of frightening or like traumatizing to like run into some of this stuff, because you don't know what's going to be there. I had a similar desire to like protect this person a little bit if that's what they want.
Yeah, you know, this question reminded me of, you know, that book by Sarah Schulman, The Ties That Bind, which is all about how our first instances of homophobia or transphobia or queerphobia are always in the family. And it, you know, this is also the idea that continues well into our adulthood. It's not only in our childhood where queer people are told that we're failing at gender or anything like that. That continues throughout our lives. It's like one of those things where whatever this person chooses, I think my advice, and you can tell me if this is in line or out of line with what you were saying, but I feel like my advice would be to do the most selfish thing that they want to do to survive that day.
Yeah.
Like, I actually think that this is a moment where they need to give themselves permission to be selfish. You know,
because no one else is having trouble with that in this whole family.
Well, I mean, it's, you know, people are like, it's this person's day, it's your day, but it's like, right. You know, you are being asked to be a part of it because the people involved love you and they want you to be there. And however you need to show up, as selfishly as you need to show up, like, and that's what your presence requires, is your selfishness, and it gets you there and it gets you to the altar as a part of the party, then please do that.
Or also feel free to not be in the wedding party. I don't know if that ever feels like an option, but like, or to not go. You know, I'm a big fan of like, it took me so many years of therapy to realize I could just not go into, I could be Kim Cattrall and not ever be in a situation, you know, and like, you know, maybe that doesn't feel possible, but you know, whoever knows. I mean, I want to say like, all I can infer is from the parenthetical in the written form of this question, the wit and the little annotations and commentary that dress to de-stress, like, yeah, you got a good read on things. So, you know, if you're already kind of feeling do I really need to go down in her street as a #best person? Like, you know I wouldn't, but like, you know, that's like, I just think exactly what you said is so right, Matt. It's just like, make some selfish choices, because what are weddings if not carte blanche to people to behave selfishly? It's just usually only the people getting married or like some, you know, there's like a charm circle of selfishness, but I think you should just draw another one right around yourself, because that's like, you know, that will serve you well, no matter where life is taking you. You know, like, take it from me. Yeah, the more selfish you can be at the beginning, the easier it's going to be. So, and we're all rooting for you. So. Well, I think that's just about it for this round of advice. But, you know, listeners, we'll be back with more advice in the future. So keep it coming our way. Speaking of, you can keep it coming specifically to outwardpodcast@slate.com. You can also send us more broadly feedback and topic ideas to that email address, or drop us a line over on the Facebook or the X at Slate Outward. Just a reminder, if you want to join Slate Plus, you'll get ad-free podcasts, extra segments on shows like Working, and you'll never hit a paywall on the Slate site. To find out more about that, you can go to slate.com/outwardplus. As always, our show was produced by the wonderful Palace Shaw, who always de-stresses us. Wait, distresses? De-stresses! De-stresses. If you like Outward, please subscribe in your podcast app. Tell your friends about it, and rate and review the show so others can find it. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Both you two, stay gay.